I never saw anybody scientifically break down rebounding the way Dennis Rodman did. So our first couple of games, we be in the layup line, and then he stopped, and he's still standing on the basket, right? And he's just looking at everybody ball, and I'm like, "What you counting?" Like he said, "I'm counting. I'm counting the spins on the ball." He said, "When you shoot, your ball spin like 3 times. Joe sometimes spent 4. This one spent." This dude was counting the rotations on the ball.
You unstoppable. That is the word NBA legends used for Dennis Rodman. Even on nights they wanted to strangle him. At first he looked like trouble. He dyed his hair in wild colors. He argued with referees. He broke team rules like they did not exist. He partied hard and slept even harder. To a lot of fans, he looked like chaos wearing a jersey. The best players in the world saw something else. They saw a man who could change a whole game without needing the ball. Dennis Rodman did not score much. He did not need to. Here's the strange part. The Rodman stood 6'7". He weighed somewhere between 210 and 228 pounds. That is small next to the giants he battled every night. Still, he helped win 5 NBA championships across 2 different teams. He became one of the most feared men on the floor. So how does a player who averaged only 3 points a game become that important? How does a man everyone doubted end up on the winning side again and again, year after year, no matter which team he wore on his chest? And if a player like that makes you feel something, hit the hype button and give this video some hype. Because Rodman's whole career was built on making people react one way or another. To understand Rodman, forget about points. Points were never his language. His language was the rebound. The Rodman finished his career averaging 3 points and 13, 1 rebounds a game. Normal stats never explained why he mattered so much. During the 1995-96 season, when the Chicago Bulls won a record number of games, a common stat called PER only ranked Rodman as the 7th best player on that team. That sounds small. It was not. Think about it like this. Every missed shot is still a basketball bouncing in the air. Someone has to grab it. If your team grabs it, you get another chance to score. If the other team grabs it, they get to run the other way. The Rodman turned nearly every one of those loose moments into something his team could use. The analysts studied this using something called rebound rate. It measures how many of the rebounds available while a player is on the floor actually end up in his hands. The Rodman posted the highest career rebound rate ever recorded in the NBA. His best single season came with the San Antonio Spurs, where his rebound numbers reached a level nobody else has matched. The season after season, whether he played in Detroit, San Antonio, or Chicago, his rebounding stayed near the top of the entire league, no matter how his teammates or his role changed around him. The experts who study these numbers say his rebounding sat many standard deviations above the normal rate for a great rebounder. In plain words, a season like his was not supposed to happen. The Rodman was not just good at grabbing misses. He was so far ahead of everyone else that his numbers looked almost impossible. He was not a hustle player who got lucky. He was a possession machine, and that machine never had an off switch. The most players who crash the boards on offense get tired and slack off on defense. It is simple physics of the human body. Energy spent chasing one end of the floor usually gets taken away from the other end. The Rodman did not follow that pattern. His offensive rebounding and his defensive rebounding both stayed high season after season, almost like his body refused to follow the normal rules everyone else lived by. That alone made him one of a kind. But grabbing that many rebounds was not an accident. The Rodman studied the game like a scientist studies an experiment. Isaiah Thomas told a story about a young Rodman standing off to the side during warm-ups instead of shooting layups with the rest of the team. When Thomas asked why, Rodman said he was watching how the ball spun off his teammates' hands. He noticed that Thomas's own shot spun about 3 times in the air. He noticed that Joe Dumars' shot spun 3.5 to 4 times. That was not a random detail. That was the beginning of a system. The Rodman watched where a shot came from. He watched the angle it left the shooter's hand. He watched how the ball spun and how hard it would hit the rim. Then he used all of that to guess exactly where the miss would land before it even left the shooter's fingers. In an old documentary called The Last Dance, Rodman explained that a player like Larry Bird had a certain spin on his shot from the wing. That spin sent misses bouncing to a specific spot on the floor almost every time. So Rodman would already be moving there while everyone else was still watching the shot go up. While other players watched the ball in the air, Rodman was already watching where it would fall. That difference, tiny as it sounds, was the whole secret. It meant he was rarely guessing. He was calculating, shot after shot, night after night, building a mental map of the game that almost nobody else on the floor even knew existed. Of course, course, knowing where a rebound would land was only half the job. The Rodman still had to beat bigger, taller, heavier men to that spot. He used a move called the spin. It was a fast, low pivot that let him slide around a defender's hips before that defender even knew he had moved. He used another move called the swim, where he pushed his arm over an opponent's shoulder to gain position without drawing a foul. He kept his body low, almost under the other player, which gave him better balance and leverage no matter how tall his opponent stood. Sometimes Rodman did not even grab the ball cleanly. He would simply tip it, redirecting a bouncing ball to himself or straight into the hoop. Phil Jackson, one of his coaches, said Rodman had tipping angles that were honestly surprising. He could tap a ball that looked nearly out of reach and somehow send it exactly where he wanted. The A ball that looked destined to fly out of bounds would somehow land softly back in his own hands, as if he had planned the whole bounce before it happened. Chuck Daly, another of his coaches, believed that once you accounted for Rodman's smaller size, there might never have been a more efficient rebounder in league history. Not even legends like Bill Russell or Wilt Chamberlain. That is a massive claim, but the numbers backed it up. The Rodman was not just a hard worker on the boards. He was a craftsman who had turned rebounding into an exact science. That same intelligence carried over to defense, where Rodman did things few players his size could pull off. He could guard fast, skilled scorers like Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan. He could also stand toe-to-toe with towering centers like Shaquille O'Neal and Alonzo Mourning. He won Defensive Player of the Year twice, even though his steal and block numbers were never flashy. His value came from something harder to measure. He stopped the other team from doing what they wanted to do. The Michael Jordan once said that Rodman played defense like a grown man handling his business alone, without needing help, without needing a double team, without needing anyone to switch onto his man for him. That is rare in basketball. The most players need backup. The Rodman rarely did. That kind of trust changes an entire defense. When one player can lock down a tough matchup on his own, the rest of the team can stay home on shooters and protect the rim instead of scrambling to help. That trust showed up clearly during the 1996 Eastern Conference Finals against a 23-year-old Shaquille O'Neal. The Shaq had a massive size advantage. He was taller and much heavier. The Rodman fought him anyway, dropping his hips low and wedging his body underneath Shaq's center of gravity. This made it much harder for Shaq to catch the ball deep in the post where he was most dangerous. The Shaq still scored plenty of points in that series. Nobody can say Rodman shut him down completely, but every catch, every step, and every post move became a fight. The Shaq grew so frustrated that he warned he might start throwing punches if Rodman kept playing that physical. The Rodman was not scared. He believed championship basketball demanded a kind of mental toughness that frustration like that could never match. Years later, Shaq tried to downplay all of it. He said Rodman had hidden behind bigger stars like Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, and he called him a bum who never had to carry the load of scoring. But that criticism missed the point entirely. By anchoring the middle of the defense and dominating the glass, Rodman let his team play a flexible defense without ever weakening their perimeter. Somebody had to do that job every single night. The Rodman did it better than almost anyone in league history. That mental side of Rodman's game deserves its own spotlight, because it might be the strangest weapon he ever used. The Rodman understood something most players never think about. Great athletes need calm minds to perform, so he made opponents lose their calm on purpose. During the 1996 NBA Finals, Seattle tried using a physical player named Frank Brickowski to rough Rodman up. The Rodman turned it around completely. He wore colored contacts, he put on lip balm, he started winking at Brickowski, blowing kisses, and getting far too close for comfort. Brickowski could not handle it. He lost his composure, picked up technical fouls, and hurt his own team's chances. The Seattle forward Sean Kemp later said, the whole team got mentally rattled because of Rodman, and that Rodman, not Jordan, was the real reason Seattle lost that series. The Brickowski had been sent out to hit Rodman and frustrate him. Instead, he became the one who could not think straight, and his own frustration hurt his team far more than it ever hurt Rodman. Against Alonzo Mourning, Rodman used a different trick. He stared at Mourning's legs during free throws and casually complimented his calves, almost like he was flirting. Mourning could not stay focused. He shouted that Rodman was sick and crazy. Michael Jordan later said Rodman had exposed Mourning as weak in the mind, showing that even a tough physical player could be thrown off by something as small as an odd comment. The Mourning was known around the league as one of the most intense, aggressive competitors alive. The Rodman found a way to rattle him anyway, using words instead of muscle. Against Karl Malone in the finals, Rodman used constant, annoying physical contact, tangling arms and legs during simple transition plays. The Malone grew frustrated and reacted, which cost his team technical fouls at exactly the wrong moments. Coach George Karl later admitted that Rodman had basically found a loophole in the rules, since the league punished punching harshly, but had no real answer for constant, irritating contact that never crossed into an obvious foul. Even James Worthy, the Lakers legend, remembered strange, uncomfortable pregame greetings from Rodman that stuck in his head long after the ball was tipped off, distracting him him during fast breaks. The worthy later said, "Modern defenders would be completely overwhelmed if they had to deal with that same mix of physical strength and mental tricks." None of this was just Rodman being silly for attention. He was making opponents think about him instead of the game in front of them. That is a real basketball skill, even if it does not show up in any box score. The distracted superstar misses easy shots. The distracted superstar loses focus on defense. The Rodman understood that better than almost anyone who ever played the game. None of this would have mattered without one more ingredient. The Rodman's body simply never stopped. After brutal, physical NBA games, most players wanted rest. The Rodman often headed straight to the training facility instead. He would ride a stationary bike on high resistance for 45 to 90 minutes. Then he would lift weights. This helped his body recover fast enough to handle heavy minutes night after night. His lifestyle looked chaotic from the outside, but he still respected his body in his own way. He avoided caffeine. He stayed away from typical processed food. He focused on lower body strength, core stability, and constant stretching. While people outside the sport saw only the wild nights and the late hours, the people inside the locker room saw a man who never skipped the extra work his body needed to survive an 82-game season of constant physical punishment. Even Shaquille O'Neal, who later called Rodman his worst teammate ever, admitted something remarkable. During their time together with the Lakers, Rodman would show up just minutes before tip-off, eat chicken and rice, take a freezing shower while coaches lectured him, and then go out and grab 15 to 20 rebounds anyway. His preparation was strange. His results were real. No coach could explain it on a whiteboard. No teammate could copy it. No trainer would ever recommend it to another athlete. It simply worked night after night for years. That same sharp mind that read rebounds and read opponents also read entire systems, which surprised coaches who expected far less from him. When the Chicago Bulls added Rodman before the 1995-96 season, some worried he could never learn Tex Winter's complicated triangle offense. That offense demanded constant movement, sharp passing, and quick decisions based on where every defender stood. Many talented players needed weeks to understand it. The Rodman reportedly grasped the spacing and concepts of the entire system within about 15 minutes on his very first day of training camp. Tex Winter said Rodman understood the spacing ideas by the end of that first practice. The coaches who had spent years teaching that offense to slower learners were stunned that the player everyone worried about turned out to be the one who picked it up the fastest. Nobody expected the wildest man in the locker room to also be one of the sharpest minds on the roster. Inside that offense, Rodman rarely looked for his own shot. He set screens. He moved the ball. He read broken plays and used his instincts to grab the offensive rebound, resetting the whole possession for his team. When a play failed, Rodman quietly gave his team a second chance to succeed. The most players cared about their own scoring numbers. The Rodman cared about whether the possession ended in a made basket for anyone wearing his team's jersey, and that selfless approach made him perfect for a system built entirely around sharing the ball. Tex Winter and Phil Jackson learned early that controlling Rodman too tightly backfired. The Winters said that if you told Rodman he could not do this or could not do that off the court, he would stop being the player he needed to be on it. So instead of fighting his personality, his coaches gave him freedom away from the game, which let him focus completely once the game began. Phil Jackson agreed, saying that trying to control Rodman was the worst possible approach. Letting him exist on his own terms was what actually unlocked his best basketball. To really understand why Rodman needed that freedom, you have to look at where his wild side came from in the first place. The Rodman grew up facing real hardship and poverty. He never knew his father. When the Detroit Pistons drafted him, head coach Chuck Daly stepped into that gap. Daly welcomed Rodman into his own home and gave him the structure and support he had never really had growing up. Under Daly, Rodman was quiet, serious, and hardworking. Teammates from that era barely recognized the loud, colorful star fans would come to know only a few years later. Then everything Rodman depended on fell apart. Chuck Daly resigned as head coach on May 5, 1992. Around the same time, the tough, tight Pistons team known as the Bad Boys broke apart, and Rodman's marriage collapsed too. In early 1993, police found Rodman sleeping in his truck in a parking lot with a loaded rifle. It was a frightening, painful moment in his life, and it deserves to be treated with care rather than shock value. It came at a time when everything familiar in his life had disappeared almost at once, from his coach to his team to his marriage, all within the span of a single year. The Rodman later explained that night differently than people expected. He said he did not try to end his life that night. Instead, he decided to end the old version of himself, the one who had spent his whole life trying to please everyone else. That decision changed everything about how he lived and how he played the game game from that point forward, on and off the floor. After, he was traded to San Antonio. The colorful, rebellious Rodman the world remembers was born. He dyed his hair. He got more tattoos. He stopped worrying about fitting in. That new identity made plenty of people uncomfortable. But on the court, it became a kind of armor. The Rodman played without fear because he had already stopped needing anyone's approval. He stopped trying to be accepted and started forcing every opponent to deal with him directly on his terms. What looked like recklessness to outsiders was really freedom, and that freedom let him throw his body into every rebound and every loose ball without a single ounce of hesitation. Put all of this together, the science, the strength, the mind games, and the wild personal history, and you understand why the greatest players of his era respected him so deeply, even when they could not fully explain how he did what he did. Michael Jordan praised Rodman's work ethic and basketball intelligence, and believed the Bulls could not have won their second set of championships without him. Isaiah Thomas treated Rodman's rebounding like a science, built on study and precision, not luck. Larry Bird respected his conditioning and the way he changed the value of every possession, even while quietly disapproving of the wild lifestyle around him. The Shaquille O'Neal criticized him constantly, calling him a difficult teammate, yet even his complaints proved how unusual and effective Rodman's talent really was. The Sean Kemp openly said Rodman damaged Seattle's championship dreams more than anyone else on the floor that year, ahead of even the biggest star in the building. Dennis Rodman was unstoppable because he took control of the parts of basketball that everybody else ignored. He owned the miss. He owned the loose ball bouncing free. He owned the second chance nobody else saw coming. He owned an opponent's patience, wearing it down possession after possession. He owned his role completely, never once asking for more shots or more attention than his team actually needed from him, night after night. He did not need to be the best scorer on the floor. He only needed to make sure the game kept bending in his team's favor. One rebound, one distraction, and one relentless sprint at a time. The other players chased highlights. The Rodman chased the small, unglamorous moments that decided who actually walked away with the trophy at the end of the season, every single time. That is why legends still talk about him today, decades after his last game. That is why nobody, not even the biggest stars in the world, could ever fully stop Dennis Rodman,